In the world of luxury air travel, where comfort meets privilege, not everything is as it seems. And on one fateful transatlantic flight, a businessman named James Morrison was about to learn this lesson the hard way. Comment below where you're watching from today, as we share a story that proves appearances can be deceiving, especially at 35,000 feet. It was supposed to be just another routine first-class flight from London to New York. The kind where wealthy executives and successful entrepreneurs trade business cards over premium champagne and gourmet meals. But sometimes, the most expensive seats on the plane can become the stage for unexpected drama, and today's flight would prove to be anything but routine. Among the passengers settling into their plush leather seats was a man who didn't quite fit the typical first-class profile. His casual attire and unassuming demeanor made him stand out among the sea of tailored suits and designer accessories. James Morrison, a self-made tech mogul known for his sharp tongue and sharper business tactics, couldn't help but notice this apparent anomaly in his carefully curated world of luxury. What happened next would become a story shared in corporate boardrooms and social media feeds across the globe. A tale of how one man's arrogance led to an encounter he would never forget, with someone whose particular set of skills extended far beyond the realm of acting. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You see, James Morrison had built his reputation on being able to spot value and status from a mile away. He prided himself on knowing who belonged in the world of first-class travel and who didn't. But on this day, his judgment would be put to the test in ways he never expected. His confidence in his ability to assess worth based on appearances was about to be shattered by a chance encounter with one of Hollywood's most respected actors. As the flight attendants began their pre-flight service, nobody could have predicted how the next few hours would unfold. The calm before the storm was marked only by the gentle hum of the aircraft's engines and the quiet murmur of passengers settling in. But in first class, a storm was brewing, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. What transpired next would teach James Morrison, and everyone present, a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and the danger of judging a book by its cover. A lesson that would follow him long after the plane touched down and the story began circulating through social media channels and entertainment news. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this remarkable encounter that proves sometimes the most powerful presence in the room is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. A story that reminds us all that true class has nothing to do with the seat you're sitting in, and everything to do with how you treat those around you. The exclusive first-class lounge at London's Heathrow Airport Terminal 5 was a sanctuary of luxury, where the air was perfumed with success and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over leather armchairs and mahogany tables, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of aircraft preparing for their international journeys. It was here, in this rarefied atmosphere, that our story truly begins to unfold. James Morrison had arrived early, as was his habit. He believed punctuality was the mark of a true professional, though his interpretation of professionalism often left much to be desired. Dressed in a bespoke Savile Row suit that cost more than some people's monthly salary, he carried himself with the air of someone who had grown accustomed to the finer things in life. His Italian leather briefcase, monogrammed with his initials in gold, sat beside him like a loyal companion. The lounge staff knew Morrison well. He was a frequent flyer who never failed to remind them of his platinum elite status. He had his usual spot, a corner seat that offered both privacy and a clear view of everyone who entered. From this vantage point, he would often observe his fellow travelers, mentally categorizing them based on their appearance, their accessories, and their manner of speaking. It was a game he played, one that fed his sense of superiority. As the morning wore on, the lounge began to fill with its typical clientele. There were the investment bankers with their Bloomberg terminals open before them, the fashion executives clutching designer portfolios, and the occasional celebrity trying to remain inconspicuous behind oversized sunglasses. Morrison watched them all, occasionally nodding to those he deemed worthy of acknowledgement. The weather outside was typically London, overcast with a hint of drizzle, creating a grey backdrop against which the bright interior of the lounge seemed even more inviting. The soft classical music playing through hidden speakers was occasionally interrupted by announcements of departing flights, creating a rhythm familiar to all frequent travelers. At precisely 10:30 a.m., a new figure entered the lounge. Unlike the other passengers who moved with the practiced ease of regular first-class travelers, this man entered with a quiet, almost contemplative presence. He wore comfortable clothing, dark jeans, a well-worn leather jacket, and boots that had clearly seen many miles. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it thoughtfully, and his face bore the kind of weathered character that spoke of a life rich with experience. The man carried no visible status symbols. No designer luggage, no flashy watch, no obvious markers of wealth. Instead, he carried a simple backpack and held a dog-eared paperback in his hand. He chose a seat by the window, away from the bustle of the main seating area, and settled in with his book, seemingly content in his solitude. Morrison's attention was immediately drawn to this anomaly in his carefully curated environment. From his corner perch, he began his usual assessment, but something about this particular passenger disrupted his usual categorization system. The man's presence seemed to command respect without demanding it, and there was a gravity to his movements that suggested someone accustomed to being watched without seeking attention. The lounge staff, however, seemed to treat this casually dressed man with a particular kind of deference. It wasn't the practiced politeness they showed to their regular wealthy clients, but rather a genuine warmth tinged with what appeared to be excitement. One of the younger staff members even did a double take while walking past, though she maintained her professional composure. As the morning progressed, the contrast between Morrison and the mysterious passenger became increasingly apparent. While Morrison made several loud phone calls, discussing business deals and dropping names of influential people, the other man remained absorbed in his book, occasionally making notes in the margins with a well-used pencil. When approached by the staff, Morrison's interactions were perfunctory and demanding, while the casual travelers were marked by genuine smiles and quiet thanks. The lounge's atmosphere shifted subtly as more passengers began to notice the unassuming man by the window. Whispers started circulating, and smartphones were discreetly raised for photos, though none dared to approach directly. It was clear that at least some of the travelers recognized him, though Morrison, absorbed in his own importance, remained oblivious to the quiet buzz of excitement. Time in airport lounges has its own peculiar quality, a blend of luxury and limbo, where minutes can stretch like hours or disappear in an instant. As the departure time approached, the lounge began its subtle transformation. Staff members started preparing for the next wave of travelers, while current passengers gathered their belongings and checked their boarding passes. It was during this transition that Morrison's path would finally cross with the mysterious passengers. The flight to New York was announced, and as premium passengers began making their way to the gate, both men stood to gather their belongings. Morrison, ever conscious of his status, made sure to be among the first to head toward the exit, his expensive shoes clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. The air outside the lounge was different, less rarefied, more charged with the energy of a major international airport. The walk to the gate was a parade of duty-free shops and hurrying travelers, a reminder of the world beyond the first-class bubble. Morrison walked with the confidence of someone who knew their place in the hierarchy of air travel, while the casual passenger followed at an unhurried pace, occasionally stopping to help a struggling elderly traveler with their bags. At the gate, the usual scene of organized chaos was playing out. Despite the clear boarding groups and procedures, there was always an underlying current of anxiety and impatience. The gate agents, well-versed in handling premium passengers, maintained their professional smiles as they processed boarding passes and answered questions. Morrison positioned himself strategically at the front of the first-class line, thumbing through emails on his phone while occasionally glancing at other passengers with barely concealed disdain. The mysterious passenger stood quietly in line, still reading his book, seemingly unbothered by the typical pre-boarding jostling for position. The aircraft itself waited beyond the gate windows, a massive Boeing 777 gleaming under the airport lights. Its first-class cabin represented the pinnacle of luxury air travel, with pods that converted into fully flat beds, personal wardrobes, and dining tables set with fine china and crystal. It was a space designed to make passengers feel exceptional, though true excellence in character often had little to do with the price of one's airline ticket. As boarding began, the gulf between Morrison's understanding of status and the reality of genuine respect was about to become startlingly clear. The gate agent's voice came over the speaker, announcing the beginning of boarding for first-class passengers. Morrison straightened his tie and prepared to board, unaware that the next few hours would completely transform his perception of worth, status, and the true meaning of class. The journey from the gate to the aircraft door was the final threshold between the ordinary world and the rarefied air of first-class travel. The jet bridge stretched before them like a gateway to another world, its walls lined with advertisements for luxury goods and five-star hotels. Morrison walked with the practiced stride of someone who had made this walk countless times, while the casual passenger followed with the relaxed gait of someone who knew that true importance needs no announcement. As they approached the aircraft door, the cabin crew stood ready to welcome their premium passengers. Their trained eyes took in every detail, from Morrison's obvious displays of wealth to the quiet dignity of the mysterious passenger behind him. The stage was now set for an encounter that would become a lesson in humility, respect, and the danger of judging others based on appearances. The first-class cabin awaited, its subtle lighting and expensive furnishings creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and privilege. But on this particular flight, the true measure of character would have nothing to do with the price of a ticket or the brand of a suit. As Morrison and the casual passenger made their way to their respective seats, neither could have predicted how their paths would cross, nor how their interaction would become a story that would resonate with millions. The first-class cabin of the transatlantic flight was a masterpiece of luxury design, with only 8 exclusive pods arranged in an intimate configuration. As fate would have it, James Morrison found himself assigned to seat 1A, while the casually dressed passenger settled into 1B, directly across the aisle. This proximity would soon prove to be the catalyst for an encounter that would change Morrison's worldview forever. As other passengers continued boarding, Morrison made a show of arranging his belongings, ensuring his Rolex was visible as he checked the time. The flight attendant approached with a tray of welcome champagne, and Morrison accepted his glass with barely a glance at her. His neighbor, however, greeted her warmly, asking about her day with genuine interest, his distinctive Irish accent carrying softly across the cabin. Morrison's attention snapped to the voice. There was something familiar about it, but he couldn't quite place it. He observed as his fellow passenger declined the champagne, instead requesting a simple glass of water. This seemed to confirm Morrison's premature judgment about whether this man belonged in first class. The pre-flight service continued, with flight attendants distributing amenity kits and taking dinner orders. Morrison couldn't help but notice how the crew seemed to linger a bit longer when serving his neighbor, their professional demeanor tinged with an unusual degree of respect and excitement. This detail should have given him pause, but his prejudices had already taken root. As the final economy passengers filed past the first-class cabin, Morrison's patience began to wear thin. One particular family with a young child caught his attention as they pointed excitedly at something, or someone, in his row. The mother quickly ushered them along, but not before Morrison caught the child's whispered exclamation, though he couldn't quite make it out. The moment the forward cabin door closed, Morrison's carefully maintained facade began to crack. He turned to his seatmate with a look of barely concealed disdain. "First time in first class?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I couldn't help but notice you seem a bit out of place." The silver-haired man looked up from his book, his blue eyes carrying a weight that Morrison failed to register. "No," he replied simply, his voice carrying that same familiar timbre. "I've flown first class many times." There was no defensiveness in his tone, just a calm statement of fact. Morrison, emboldened by the lack of confrontation, pressed on. "Really? I find that hard to believe. You know, some of us work very hard to afford this level of luxury. It's not just about having a ticket, it's about maintaining certain standards." He gestured vaguely at his neighbor's casual attire. A few other first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman in 2C appeared to be recording discreetly on her phone, while a businessman in 2D watched the exchange with growing disbelief. The flight attendants exchanged knowing looks but maintained their professional composure. The man in 1B closed his book carefully, placing it on his side table. "Standards?" he inquired, his voice taking on a subtle edge that would have been familiar to anyone who had seen his most famous film roles. "And what standards would those be?" Morrison, completely missing the warning signs, launched into his self-important monologue. "Well, presentation for one. Proper attire, proper manners, proper pedigree. First class is more than just a seat, it's a lifestyle. Some people understand that, and some clearly don't." He smiled smugly, clearly pleased with his own perceived superiority. The cabin had grown remarkably quiet, with even the background noise of the aircraft engines seeming to fade away in anticipation of what would happen next. The flight attendant who had been preparing to begin the safety demonstration paused, her hands clasped tightly around the demonstration belt. "I see," the man responded, his voice now carrying a hint of amusement. "And you believe you're qualified to determine who meets these standards?" The question was posed with the same intensity that had made him famous for his dramatic roles, though Morrison remained oblivious to the growing tension in the cabin. "Of course," Morrison declared, his voice carrying through the cabin. "I've built my success on being able to recognize quality. And let me tell you, showing up in first class looking like you've just walked in off the street? That's not quality. That's not class." A soft gasp came from somewhere in the cabin. The flight attendant who had been hovering nearby stepped forward, her face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. "Mr. Neeson, I'm so sorry for any discomfort. Would you like me to arrange different seating?" The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Morrison's face, which had been set in an expression of smug superiority, began to shift as recognition slowly dawned. The man he had been lecturing about class and standards was none other than Liam Neeson, acclaimed actor, humanitarian, and one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Neeson raised a hand gently, stopping the flight attendant's offer. "No need," he said, his voice now carrying that unmistakable tone that had delivered countless memorable lines in films. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." His eyes locked onto Morrison's, and in that moment, the businessman felt the full weight of his mistake. The other passengers were now watching openly, all pretense of disinterest abandoned. Some had their phones out, undoubtedly documenting what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. Morrison's face had drained of color, his earlier bravado evaporating under the steady gaze of the man he had so foolishly attempted to belittle. "You see," Neeson continued, his voice carrying that particular cadence that had made his speeches in films so memorable, "class isn't about the clothes you wear or the seat you sit in. It's not about how much money you have or what you think you've achieved. Class is about how you treat people, all people, regardless of their perceived status." Morrison opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization that he had just lectured one of Hollywood's most legendary actors about belonging in first class was beginning to sink in. His expensive suit suddenly felt confining, his carefully cultivated image of success crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. The flight attendants had begun their safety demonstration, but few passengers were paying attention. All eyes were fixed on the drama unfolding in the front row. Neeson's presence seemed to fill the cabin, though he hadn't raised his voice or moved from his seat. It was the kind of commanding attention that came not from seeking it, but from earning it through years of respected work and genuine character. "I've played many roles in my career," Neeson continued, his voice now carrying a hint of wisdom rather than rebuke. "Kings and criminals, heroes and villains. But in all those years, I've learned that the true measure of a person isn't in what they own or how they appear. It's in how they respect others, especially those they think can't do anything for them." Morrison's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. The champagne he had so proudly accepted earlier sat untouched, much like his phone, which had been silenced mid-email. The businessman who had arrived so full of self-importance was now shrinking into his luxury pod, wishing he could disappear entirely. The aircraft began its taxi to the runway, but the tension in the first-class cabin remained palpable. Other passengers were now whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads at Morrison's behavior, others clearly thrilled to be witnessing such an encounter. The story would undoubtedly spread across social media before they even reached cruising altitude. As the engines powered up for takeoff, Neeson returned to his book, his point made without need for further elaboration. Morrison sat in silence, his earlier swagger replaced by a profound sense of embarrassment. The 7-hour flight to New York stretched before him like an eternity, each minute a reminder of how spectacularly his assumptions had backfired. The incident would soon become a viral sensation, shared across social media platforms with headlines about karma and humility. But for now, in the confines of the first-class cabin, it served as a powerful reminder that true class has nothing to do with the price of admission and everything to do with the content of one's character. The remainder of the flight took on a different atmosphere than Morrison had anticipated when he'd boarded. As the aircraft reached its cruising altitude, the first-class cabin settled into an uncommon quiet, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the engines and the occasional whisper from amazed passengers still processing what they'd witnessed. Morrison sat in his luxury pod, the fine leather and premium amenities offering little comfort to his wounded pride. His phone, which had been his constant companion during every flight, remained untouched in his bag. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent years cultivating an image of success, only to have it shattered by someone who wasn't even trying to prove anything. The flight attendants continued their impeccable service, maintaining their professionalism despite the earlier drama. However, their interactions with Morrison now carried a subtle frost, while their exchanges with Neeson remained warmly respectful. One could hardly blame them, they'd witnessed countless displays of entitlement over the years, but rarely had they seen one so thoroughly and elegantly dismantled. As the meal service began, the contrast between the two men became even more apparent. Morrison picked at his carefully plated first-class dinner, his appetite diminished by embarrassment. Neeson, on the other hand, engaged in pleasant conversation with the crew, asking about their families and sharing small anecdotes from his own travels. His genuine interest in others highlighted everything that Morrison's artificial superiority lacked. Word of the encounter had already begun spreading throughout the aircraft. Passengers from business and economy who made their way to the forward restrooms walked slower than necessary, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Hollywood star who had delivered an unforgettable lesson in humility. Some even had their phones ready, though the flight attendants professionally discouraged any unauthorized photography. Halfway through the flight, something unexpected happened. During a quiet moment when most passengers were either sleeping or watching movies, Neeson turned to Morrison. His expression wasn't unkind, but rather contemplative. "You know," he began, his voice low enough to maintain privacy, "I've played many characters who learned their lessons the hard way. It's not the mistake that defines us, it's what we do after." Morrison, who had been pretending to be absorbed in his entertainment screen, found himself unable to avoid the interaction. The words hit him with the force of truth, making him realize that this moment could either become a story of embarrassment or one of growth. His response would determine which. I owe you an apology," Morrison managed, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. "What I said was completely out of line. I've spent so long judging people based on appearances that I forgot what really matters." The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they carried the weight of genuine realization. Neeson nodded, acknowledging the apology without diminishing its importance. "We all make judgments," he replied, his Irish lilt carrying the wisdom of years in the public eye. "But the true measure of success isn't in how well we can look down on others, it's in how well we can lift them up." The conversation could have ended there, but something had shifted in Morrison. Years of carefully constructed superiority began to crack, revealing questions he'd never allowed himself to ask. "How do you do it?" he inquired, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier condescension. "Maintain such normalcy, despite your success. A small smile played at the corners of Neeson's mouth. Success, he mused. That's a complicated word. I've been fortunate in my career, yes. But true success isn't measured in awards or accolades. It's measured in the lives you touch, the respect you show, and the kindness you share, especially when no one's watching. As their conversation continued, other passengers tried to pretend they weren't listening, though the lesson being taught was one everyone could benefit from. The flight attendants moved through the cabin more slowly, ensuring every passenger had what they needed while discreetly taking in this unexpected moment of transformation. The clothes, the accessories, the first-class tickets, Neeson continued, gesturing to their surroundings, they're all just temporary comforts. But how you treat the person serving your coffee, helping with your bags, or sitting next to you on a flight, that reveals your true character. And character, unlike wealth, can't be purchased or pretended. Morrison found himself nodding, years of carefully constructed facades beginning to crumble. He thought about all the times he'd dismissed people based on their appearance, all the opportunities for connection he'd missed because of his prejudices. I've been so focused on appearing successful, he admitted, that I forgot what success really means. The lesson wasn't just for Morrison. Other passengers in the cabin had put aside their movies and books, quietly absorbing the wisdom being shared. Even those who had been eagerly recording the earlier confrontation now sat in thoughtful reflection, their phones forgotten in their hands. As the flight progressed toward its destination, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. The initial tension had given way to something more profound, a shared understanding that true class has nothing to do with the seat number on your boarding pass. Morrison, who had boarded the flight believing himself above others, found himself experiencing something new, humility. The New York skyline eventually appeared through the aircraft's windows, a glittering reminder that every journey must come to an end. But for Morrison and those who had witnessed the events of this flight, the impact would last far beyond touchdown at JFK International Airport. As the aircraft began its descent, phones throughout the cabin lit up as passengers regained their connection to the outside world. Social media was already buzzing with second-hand accounts of what had transpired, though none could capture the full depth of the lesson taught at 35,000 feet. The flight attendants began their final service, collecting glasses and ensuring the cabin was prepared for landing. One of them paused by Morrison's seat, offering him a genuine smile for the first time since his earlier behavior. It was a small gesture, but it reflected the change that had taken place over the Atlantic. When the aircraft finally came to a stop at the gate, passengers began the usual routine of gathering their belongings. But there was a difference in how they moved, a new awareness of their interactions with each other and the crew. Morrison, who would normally have been first to stand and retrieve his belongings, remained seated, allowing others to pass. As Neeson prepared to disembark, several passengers approached him, not for autographs or selfies, but to thank him for the lesson he had taught. He accepted their gratitude with the same humble grace he had displayed throughout the flight, reinforcing through his actions everything he had said about true class. Morrison was the last to leave the first-class cabin. As he walked through the terminal, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor, he was a changed man. His suit still cost more than most people's monthly salary, his watch still gleamed with the same expensive shine, but his perspective had been irreversibly altered. The story of that flight would circulate widely, shared across social media platforms and discussed in countless conversations. But the real impact wasn't in the viral moments or clever headlines, it was in the quiet realizations made by those who witnessed or heard about it. Success, they learned, isn't about what you own or how you dress. It's about how you treat others, especially when you think no one important is watching. Before we end this story, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance, only to be proven wrong? Have you witnessed moments where true class shone through, despite humble appearances? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters in life. Remember, in a world where anyone can buy luxury, true class remains priceless. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, even at 35,000 feet above the ground.